In this video, global competencies are defined, their characteristics explained, and suggestions are made for how you and your students can experience success through an active exploration and incorporation of these skills, sometimes referred to as transferable skills or the 6 C's of deep learning. Take it from me, having consulted with several educators exploring global competencies in their own practices, it is clear that the leadership imparted to students is transferring both teaching and their learning. As you continue with this video, consider framing your thinking against our session learning goals. From a teacher's perspective, think about deepening your understanding of practices that engage students with differences in their backgrounds, their learning strengths, needs, as well as their interests. And from a leadership perspective, focus on determining your next best move to growing individual as well as collective teacher efficacy. Let's take a look at the Ontario context. Currently, Ontario educators are continuously working alongside their students to helping them develop learning skills. These skills, based on research, are integral to helping them become effective learners and to succeed in both school and in life. These skills include responsibility, organization, independent work, collaboration, initiative, and self-regulation. Ontario's assessment framework, or Growing Success, also provides several descriptors of sample behaviors that teachers can use when discussing the learning skills with their students and assessing their development of these skills. What about transferable skills? To better understand the current context for skills that underpin successful, future-oriented learning, learning that provides opportunities for student-centered leadership and developing citizenship, we need to consider equity. According to Ontario's Equity Action Plan, we might describe equity as a state where all students have every opportunity to reach their full potential and succeed personally and academically, with access to rich learning experiences that provide a strong foundation of confidence that continues throughout their lives. Understanding that there are many considerations to addressing inequity in education of profound significance and hope is captured by what Michael Fullan calls the equity hypothesis. The hypothesis essentially is this: students who see themselves and their learning in the world, that's connected to the world, being relevant, meaningful, applicable learning, they learn more deeply and are themselves transformed along with the people they have served. In fact, Fullan explains through his own examples that students most disaffected by a more traditional form of learning are the quickest to adopt and move the furthest when we frame learning through globalized competencies. This hypothesis, if educators are keen to take on its exploration, can work, but it is important to remember that our pedagogical practices must also be redressed alongside our students and colleagues if we are to generate solutions and sustain long-term growth to bring equity to student learning. To make better connections to the world, a different set of skills are required for success. These are called transferable skills. The skills include critical thinking, innovation and creativity, self-directed learning, collaboration, communication, and citizenship. Upon a closer examination, these might be considered meta skills. The previously mentioned learning skills can be mapped under the transferable skills. Take, for instance, critical thinking. From the learning skills, one can see how organization, collaboration, and self-regulation all play key roles in students developing and enacting critical thinking. Similar connections can be made between the remaining learning skills and the transferable skills. Again, it's very important to make this distinction. Global competencies connect students to the real world, and it is through these connections that students will experience greater success. Now, up to this point in time, you might be wondering, this is great, but what kinds of learning experiences are going to help the students in my school build the success that comes through identifying and recognizing these skills? Well, flat out, we need to recognize that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. In fact, and as you may have experienced or are currently experiencing, this is exceedingly tough work, but it is and can be the most gratifying work and experience you and your school can have. Systematically, you will need to collaborate with your leadership and fellow educators through cycles of inquiry where you are simultaneously seeking out and honoring your students' voices. Based on the needs you identify, you might explore a confluence of factors: technology, pedagogical practices, connections to the community, as well as learning spaces within your school and spaces that go beyond the traditional classroom. As an assurance, over time, it will get easier because you will be establishing a culture of learning that embraces these types of skills, and you'll have the excellence as a marker of your school's success in achievement, well-being, and overall student feedback that speaks of empowerment to being leaders of their own learning. In closing, I'd like to thank you for watching this video and moving further into the Before You Arrive activities. Leading up to our session, here are a few post-video suggestions to continue your learning. 1. Delve into the suggested resources linked alongside this video. You can find them either below the video on YouTube or here on the session website. Continuously connect to the learning goals mentioned in the introduction. 3. As a starting point, explore global competencies with your students. 4. Visit and participate in a colleague's classroom where they are being used to frame both teaching and student learning. 5. Share your learning. Share it with someone else. For example, maybe a colleague. Share it with your principal, your vice principal. Share it with a learning network or your professional learning community. And 6, as you stretch your thinking and learning, you might also consider making connections from global competencies and or formative assessment to the elements of thinking classrooms or to flipped learning. Note that each of these learning activities can be found on the session website. Formative assessment is under Learning Activity Option 1. Thinking Classrooms, Option 2. Flipped Learning, Option 3. And lastly, Global Competencies, Learning Activity Option 4. As this video wraps up, I'm looking forward to working alongside each of you as we seek to co-create conditions that can give life to equity in the teaching and learning we do with students and one another each and every day. If at any time you have questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me at Flipping the Focus using the contact information provided on the session website.